Hey guys, Vance here from the My Latin Life podcast. Today we have a bonus episode for you. This is my guest appearance on the Dating Decoded podcast hosted by How to Beast and Dave Perrotta. In this episode, we get into talking about dating in Latin America. Dave asks some excellent questions. I do my best not to get in trouble, and we had fun. So without further ado, let's hop into this bonus episode from the Dating Decoded podcast.
Welcome to Dating Decoded, where Dave Perrotta, the head coach of the Beast Dating Coaching Program, shows you exactly how to talk to beautiful women, flirt like a pro, and attract your dream partner.
What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Dating Decoded podcast. Today, we got a fun episode. This is actually the first interview we've done on the podcast. Going to be doing a lot more of them. We got Vance from My Latin Life on the show. He's a good friend of mine down here in Mexico. And yeah, he's just a great resource on Twitter. If you check out My Latin Life, as well as he's got a great podcast, really just a great resource for anything Latin America, whether it be getting residencies, dating, anything you could think of Latin America, city breakdowns. He's got it. What's going on, Vance, man? It's good to have you on.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
For sure, man. For sure. So today, really the main focus is going to be dating in Latin America. So I know a lot of you guys like Latina girls. A lot of you guys have thought about traveling down to Latin America or even just dating Latinas in the U.S. So we'll talk about all that. The main problem, just in general, is that guys want to be able to meet Latinas inside and outside Latin America, but they don't really have a strategy for it. They don't really know maybe too much about it. And they also don't really know how to be safe once they get there. So we're going to cover all of that. And yeah, we're going to do a deep dive in Latin America. So you're fully prepared to go south of the border and have a lot of dating success while staying safe. So with that being said, let's kind of hop right into it here. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the best Latin American countries for dating. And you can throw in some of your favorite cities as well. I guess let's start with you, Vance. Like, what would you say are kind of like some of your favorite Latin American countries for dating?
I would say number one would have to be Brazil.
Brazil? Okay, what makes you say Brazil?
Ooh, why Brazil? Well, it's a big country, obviously 200 plus million people. It's very unexplored for the Western traveler, so there's a much lower ratio of expats and digital nomads and Americans compared to other countries. Especially once you leave Sao Paulo and Rio and Floripa and some of the bigger destinations. Like once you leave the biggest 3 or 4 cities, there's literally zero gringos, so less competition in terms of, standing out on the dating market. And I think that's a huge thing. I think especially now in 2024, there is a lot of American travelers going to Latin America, especially to the most common places such as Mexico City and Medellin and so forth. And so from a dating perspective, you're really going to have the best bang for your buck, pun intended, when you go to cities with less gringos.
Yeah, I know you're really a big fan of like the tier 2, tier 3 cities that are kind of outside of the scope of like the typical gringo dude who's trying to travel down there, right? Like the Medellins, the like the Sao Paulo, the Rios, the Mexico cities, all those kinds of places.
Yeah, definitely. I did kind of start answering a different question. I guess just to finish is why Brazil. I think they just have a good, genuine, like fun-loving nature. Like it's a very joyful place. It's very, they're very like open to dating and very like open people, and they'll invite you to the barbecue and invite you to play volleyball and this kind of thing, and they're just very like dating is a huge part of just the social life and life in Brazil. So just kind of like the dating infrastructure is there. It's very easy to go get like a chill beer at a boteco, as it's called, which is just like a bar on the corner and stuff. So you don't have to do fancy dinners or anything. And I think just like for a lot of, the type of people, the demographics and stuff, I think there's just like a lot of moving pieces as to why Brazil really is the best country. It's very overlooked. Obviously, most people go to Colombia and Mexico would probably be the most popular, but I would say Brazil is the best.
Yeah, man. I've never actually been to Brazil myself. Obviously, we have a lot of friends who've spent a lot of time over there, and they like it. Like a lot of my friends, they kind of see Brazil as like that fun place to go where you just kind of go be degenerate for a few months, right? And then you kind of come back to normal life, like further up in Latin America or something like that. Like I know we have a mutual buddy, Joe, like that's his move. He loves doing that. It's definitely been on my list of places to go. I met some beautiful Brazilian girls just around the world, but I haven't been there yet, so it's definitely on the list. I'm curious, how big of how key is it to learn Portuguese when you're in Brazil? Because I know like a lot of guys know Spanish, like it's a little bit easier in Spanish-speaking countries, but how big is the barrier if you don't know Portuguese?
It's definitely a barrier, which kind of works in your favor in some ways. I think that's why a lot of people don't go, because I think a lot of Americans say, oh, I did 2 years of high school Spanish, I'm good in Latin America, but Brazil is a different animal. And so I think that kind of keeps people out. So it kind of works in your favor in that sense. The English level is obviously pretty low, but you study up a little bit, you speak some kind of weird mix of English and Portuguese, and they'll tolerate it. Like they're just very good, like tolerant people. It's not, it's not France or anything. So they'll put up with it.
Yeah. I have like the Brazilian girls I have met who didn't speak great English or and a lot of them have had at least like passable Spanish, or it's been enough to where that I could speak Spanish at them and they could kind of speak Portuguese at me. Like we kind of figured it out. So if you have at least a low level or like a decent level of Spanish, sometimes I've heard you can get by there. But yeah, do you have any like good tier 2, tier 3 cities you recommend that you think guys should check out if they're really trying to kind of get deep in Brazil?
Oh man, that's a secret knowledge.
That's a secret knowledge.
I wanted to actually, Dave, pick up on a thread you said there, which is kind of like how to navigate situations both for Portuguese and Spanish-speaking countries, or really any foreign country where you don't speak the language. And Dave, I'm sure you've noticed this as well, which is that what happens is you focus more on the body language and the nonverbal communication. And I'm sure in your mentorships and your dating programs, you probably talk a lot about body language and nonverbal communication. And when you are in a country where you're forced to not rely on the verbal banter and you're really forced to focus more on your vibe and your presence and your eye contact and things like that, you get better at these things.
100%, man, 100%. Like I remember my early days moving down to Colombia, like when my Spanish was super, super low level, I basically had the high school Spanish level down, right? And yeah, it was all body language. It was very just much getting physical with the girl, really focus on just like leading, walking her somewhere and just kind of hoping for the best. And that's also something I've seen in other countries I've been to, right? Like being in Japan, I wasn't trying to learn Japanese. You learn a couple words and then you just lead and hope for the best, right? But it does kind of create some fun situations and scenarios where you just, you're just having some fun communicating with a girl that you never thought you'd be communicating with.
Yeah, exactly. There's like little gags that you can do as well that you can do kind of in every country. There's, the classic like Google Translate communication. There's more physical things like you can do. Like, I'm not sure if you've ever done things like play like different like finger games, like rock, paper, scissors, or the one where you like put your palms out and then you like slap the back of the hand type thing, or like different like little like stupid games you can do, but it helps build the kino and helps build the physical touch and the escalation.
100%, man, 100%. And just to kind of all right, so we go Brazil, right? And then I'll kind of hop in here with one of my favorite places. Obviously, I've been living in Mexico for most of the last like 7-8 years, traveling a bit in between. But I would say for me, Mexico would be one of the top ones. And I know for some guys, they would rate Mexico maybe a little bit lower. But my take on it is I think they have the highest quality girls and sort of the most girlfriend material kind of girls as well. just from the standpoint of it, like the average, right? If you just look at the average, you're going to want to take like the Colombian girls are going to be more attractive, right? But if you're looking at the higher tier girls in Mexico, those are some of the most attractive girls in Latin America, and they're also some of the coolest, most down to earth, and they're similar to American girls in some ways, but not in like the annoying ways, if you know what I'm saying. Right? Like they have fun, like fun personalities. They get your humor, whereas maybe some girls in Colombia or a little bit further south might not fully get it, and they understand some of the American or even like the European, jokes, sarcasm that you might have, and yeah, I've just had a lot of good success just meeting really, really cool girls in Mexico. I guess any thoughts on that for you?
I tend to agree. I think it's a good balance, like a best of both worlds kind of thing.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, man. And also just like the lifestyle in Mexico is like, I always like to say there's different levels of friction in places that you go throughout Latin America. And for me, like I'm a guy that I've gotten better at dealing with friction, but over time I get more and more annoyed sometimes when things just don't work correctly. And I know in Colombia, if you're in a place like Medellin, things are just very slow. But in Mexico, especially if you're in one of the bigger cities, talk about Mexico City, it's things are a lot faster paced, and it's a lot more similar to America as far as like service and just being able to get things done. There's still like some really annoying things that happen, right? Like you walk into an OXXO, which is like a 7-Eleven over here, and there's 3 people in front of you. It might take 20 minutes, right? and so there's still a friction like that. But just overall, compared to other Latin American countries, it seems to be the least amount of friction for what you're going to get.
I think that's accurate. There's Walmart, there's Costco, there's Amazon. So a lot of the conveniences are there in Mexico.
Yeah, no, you can get those Amazon deliveries real quick. Got an air conditioner delivered the other day within a couple of days, which is nice. So, yeah, it's good to have a little bit of the American sort of capitalism like mixed in here as far as like being able to buy things really easily and things just functioning well. So yeah, so I would rate Mexico right near the top, and I know a few of the other common ones are like Argentina, Peru. I've been to Peru. I haven't really dated there. I went there with the girl. And in Argentina, I haven't been there, but I know a lot of guys who have and have had a lot of success there. Do you have any thoughts on those places?
Well, definitely 2 very different places, Peru and Argentina. I don't know where to start. I mean, Peru is a really big country. Most people tend to focus on Lima, though. Great place for everything, dating, lifestyle.
I was going to say, just to chime in, like from what I've heard about just dating in Lima, it's almost like Philippines level of dating. You know what I mean? Where it's like very, very easy to get some of the most attractive girls in sort of the city or the country. There's not as many foreigners there, so it's not as saturated as maybe some of the top cities in Mexico or like Medellin, Colombia, things like that.
Well, I think just mathematically, like Lima's how many people? 15 million people, and it's probably got only a fraction of the gringos of say Mexico City. So
yeah, 100%. Yeah. Then as far as Argentina goes, from what I've heard, like the girls are very attractive. There's some decent level of English, maybe more so than Colombia, but then also the girls can be a little bit colder. Like a little bit on the colder side. Have you seen any of that?
Flakier as well.
Flakier, yeah. Like it's hard to get them out in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's also a really big city, right? Like Buenos Aires is also about 15 million people, and if you're on the apps and stuff, a lot of these girls might end up living quite far away, and they're taking public transportation. And I remember even situations where it was like, I will pay for your Uber. And they're like, yeah, but it's still going to be like a more than half-hour Uber. And it's like, So like the logistics, I think that can kind of apply to any mega city in Latin America. I think the thing with Argentina is there's a couple of moving pieces there. So the conveniences are not there, right, because of just the economic situation. And a lot of the gringos that go down there kind of complain and get frustrated with different aspects of just like the disorganization. And it's not as cheap as it used to be because they've kind of regularized the Argentine peso. So the prices are higher now than they were even a year ago, like significantly higher, like double. So it's the geo arbitrage isn't quite there as much. I think Argentina just takes more work, but I think the women are like definitely really attractive, like probably like the highest average beauty or average attractiveness in Latin America, but it probably takes a little bit more work. But it's nothing your well-trained mentees can't handle.
100%, man. And yeah, I mean, one thing I would say, just kind of wrap up this kind of topic, is you're gonna enjoy yourself in any Latin American country if you just go there with an open mind, looking to embrace the culture a little bit, learn a little bit of the language, and obviously you keep safety in mind, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But if you just approach it with an open mind, go out there, approach girls, talk to girls, go on dates, use the online dating, you're gonna have fun, you're gonna have success. And really, the more the language you learn, the better. So it definitely helps to take some lessons before you go down there. But yeah, so that kind of leads me to the next thing, which is just some common myths that guys might have around dating in Latin America. So I have a few here. I'm curious, kind of your thoughts on them, or if there's any that you add. But I would say the first big myth is that if you suck with girls in the USA, you're going to be really good with girls in Latin America. And my kind of take on it is that if you suck with girls in the US, you're just going to be really easy to be taken advantage of in Latin America, because you don't know how to read signals the right way. You're not going to know, you're going to get a little too excited about hot girls being into you. And it just kind of leaves you vulnerable, right? You see things like in Colombia has been on the rise, like scopolamine, where, sort of these gringos go down there, they're unsuspecting, a hot girl comes out to meet them, and then the next second they're getting drugged and all their stuff's stolen, right? So, you gotta have your wits about you, and you have to, like, if you don't have success in the US, like, don't expect to come down to Latin America and do really, really well.
Well, I'll preface this by saying, and I really should preface the whole podcast, but that I'm not a dating coach. I'm not like a Latin America dating coach. What we do is relocation and immigration and internationalization, helping people get multiple passports and so forth. Obviously, I'm aware that dating is a big piece of relocating in Latin America. And so I do, hear a lot of things. I had a guy, Dave, just recently that he said, I'm relocating to Medellin. I've, been doing my research. Medellin's the place for me. And I'm like, all right, just keep in mind, like, it's not really a place that you want to be dating as a first timer that doesn't speak any Spanish. It can be a little dangerous. Just don't use the apps. And he's like, yeah, I got it. So he gets down there and he's like, yeah, I'm having a hard time meeting people. I'm like, don't use the apps. Just go to the mall, meet people in person. I don't know. Just don't use the apps. And, he comes back to me like a week later and he goes, yeah, so Vance, I opened the apps. I was lonely. So I organized to meet up with the girl. We went to like a mall, get some food at the mall. And then she said she wanted the equivalent of like $100 for her time. She wanted to come back to I should have prefaced. She said she wanted to come back to my place. I said, no, I don't do that the first time. But it was great, getting food, and we'll talk soon. And then she's like, well, you got to pay me $100 for my time. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, if you don't give me $100 right now, I'm going to start screaming in the mall. I'm going to make a huge scene right now. And he's like, whoa. He just like whipped out his wallet and like gave her some money and like got the hell out of there. And he was feeling dirty afterwards.
Yeah, man. No, I mean, again, if you're an unsuspecting gringo and you don't know how to screen girls and vet girls correctly, you're gonna get into some bad situations, especially if you're in Colombia, I would say, right? That's when you got to be on the highest alert. Now,
Colombia's the one, man.
Yeah,
Colombia's the one that you got to avoid. It's Yeah, it's if you really want to date in Latin America, Colombia is the country where you're going to get in the most dangerous situations due to the scopolamine, which is like the devil's breath drugging thing. Also, just due to the general more gold diggerish culture of Colombia, and there's a couple reasons that or factors that kind of coalesce into why Colombia is the country that you have to be the most aware. And honestly, that's one of the reasons it hasn't been the country that I've spent the most time. Like, I just never wanted to, like, you know, put myself in these kind of situations and so forth. And so really anywhere else, you're pretty much fine. Like Mexico, Central America, Brazil, pretty much anywhere else you go, you're not going to really run into these crazy scenarios. Colombia is the one you really have to be the most careful with.
I will say this, like I've heard about people getting scoped. I've had friends who've gotten scoped and had all their stuff stolen. I know some guys are getting crypto stolen because that's just the way the drug works. That being said, you know, I was living down in Bogota for a bit last year and had a lot of success. And the way that I did it was I made sure that if I had any question about a girl, and I use the apps too, but if I had any question or hesitation about a girl, I just wouldn't even match with her in the first place, right? Or if there was a girl who didn't have an Instagram, or if she, you know, just it looked a little bit fake, if there was any kind of weirdness, I just wouldn't hang out with her, right? And then I would also make sure to tip my door guys, like make sure I took care of them and was like, hey, if there's ever any weirdness or like here, whatever, like have my back, right? So I'd be buying them 6-packs, I'd buy them coffees. They love me, right? And then, and that was kind of my protection. And then, so a mix of that, basically just not messing with any girls that I perceive to be potentially low quality in any way, mixed with, you know, using my tour guides for protection. I never had any issues. And the guy I was living with at the time, he didn't have any issues either. And we definitely had some fun over there, but we were very careful. There was one time I was walking down a street in like a very chill area in Bogota on like a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. I had a guy roll up behind me on a motorbike and try to take my phone from my hand. And I caught him at the last second and I pulled it away, but it got me shook up. I was like, man, I can never take my phone out on the street over here. And that's more of like, that's very much a Bogota thing you got to be careful of. But it can happen in other places. But it's really, like, I'm not worried about my phone in Condesa in Mexico City or anything like that, right? So it's definitely a place where you have to keep your wits about you and be smart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not just the dating or girls. It really is kind of the whole country of Colombia can be a little bit dicey. And it's weird because it can feel very safe at times, but then just like things can change in an instant. I think, you know, when you talk about red flags, it's probably worth mentioning that the red flags, there are differences. There are red flags anywhere in the world, and those red flags are a little bit contextual. I mean, certainly there's overlap, but there's also red flags that as an American you wouldn't know about, and they're kind of specific to Latin America. So you have to like learn a couple new red flags when you come to the region. Yeah,
so as far as red flags go that are like specifically for Latin America, what would you say your biggest ones are? So I have a few in mind. And I guess, are you talking about red flags for safety or red flags for, is this girl dateable?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. There's definitely overlap. Trying to think. Well, one would be like, are there photos of family in her pictures on Instagram or friends, or is it like just all her?
100%. Yeah. Or if it's like just her in Tulum or like in a bunch of different, like 5-star hotels, and it's like, she's probably a working girl.
Yeah. Travel, like especially international travel on the Instagram is a thing. I mean, there's like definitely Instagram specific red flags. There's dating profile red flags. There's other ones where you might notice on, say, like WhatsApp or texting apps. Like if they're a little bit too like amor and mi corazón,
they're too into you too quickly. It's kind of similar to how like a ladyboy in Thailand or something might be, right? Where they're like, wait, this girl's really attractive. Why is she like, why is this so easy? What, like, there's something not adding up here. right? And I think it's a similar feeling that you might get in Latin America versus like Asia, obviously for similar reasons. But if things are too easy, like you should have like alarm bells going off in your head, like, okay, what's the catch? Like what's going on here?
I think living situation as well, like, right, like the classic or the most standard situation in Latin America is that someone lives with their family, basically till they get married. So like inquiring about the living situation is important, like whether it's roommates or just getting the story there is important.
Yeah, no, making sure that you understand her situation. Does she actually have like a real job too? Or is she just kind of like floating around, right? There's a lot of girls on like OnlyFans and stuff like that. There's like actually a super high amount in Colombia on OnlyFans, either OnlyFans or like they're doing some other sort of like video thing. So that's something to watch out for as well. And that's more of like a girlfriend red flag. But yeah, okay. So, you know, we talked about one myth, talked about some red flags. Any other myths that you think guys should be aware of or just like they think should be dispelled here?
Yeah. What were you saying? You're saying that there's, what are some of these myths? And maybe I can debunk them.
Well, I think another one maybe is like all Latin women are traditional. So like a lot of guys might see these Latin girls as like, oh, they're all like these like super conservative, like family oriented, feminine girls. And there's definitely some of that. Like there's plenty of traditional girls, but like we were talking about, there's also plenty of girls that are on OnlyFans or looking for sugar daddies. They're like IG famous. So you gotta be ready to choose carefully. And this is another thing where if you don't know what you're doing, you can easily wind up with the wrong girl in your life.
It's a good question. I think they definitely are. The society is definitely much more traditional than the U.S. And, you know, certain people take it to different levels, but you're going to encounter things in Latin America that you just haven't seen in the U.S., such as like a girl from like a really good family. Like she can't really be out past like 10 p.m. without, you know, calling her dad and getting permission and explaining who she's with and this sort of things. Like the type of like curfew type stuff that in the US doesn't really happen once you hit maybe like 16 or 18 years old. And you might be going on a date with a girl in Latin America that's 25, maybe even 28, but she's living at home and she has to explain like why she's out past dark. And I remember that that surprised me back in the day.
Well, yeah, no, it's an interesting thing because there definitely are a lot of girls that live at home, and that kind of brings me to like another idea of just like the differences in classes in Latin America is like very distinct versus maybe in the U.S. Like if you're talking about like a high class Latin girl, like there was one girl I was dating for a little bit in Bogota, clearly came from a really, really good family. Like her sister, you know, got married in Dubai, all this stuff. Her family had a finca, like this big like finca, like farmhouse mansion in like the countryside. And you could tell she just operated a little bit differently. And it was the type of girl you have to be a little bit crafty to meet that kind of girl because you know, you wouldn't necessarily just meet her in like some random bar or something like that. You have to be like going to classy places, like, you know, maybe doing a little bit of social circle stuff, being a little bit more intentional to get across a girl like that and then to be able to actually get her attracted. Mm-hmm. And they're also quick. Yeah, they're also quick to kind of throw you to the wayside if they can tell you're not serious, right? Because they were raised a bit more traditionally.
Right, because you're from New England, so you probably understand some of these things a little bit in terms of private school versus public school,
yeah,
boarding schools, and the kind of like Ivy League network. So maybe you understand that more than people from other parts of the U.S., but that's even more pronounced in Latin America, where there's just such a huge gap between lower and middle and upper class. And there definitely is a thing where when gringos go down to Latin America, they can't perceive the class differences, or they just don't really care because the girl's hot or whatever. And I think as you spend more time in Latin America, you'll start to notice these differences a little bit more, and you'll start to put more emphasis in going up market, let's say. because it's something we've talked about on Twitter a little bit, or at least other guys that I'm connected with do. I try to stay away from it a bit, but it's definitely a thing, and it can be hard to get access to the high class girls, right? Because they might not be on the apps and they might not be in the clubs and so forth. So people will have to make a concerted effort to ingratiate themselves in upper class circles, either through, I don't know, playing sports or maybe meeting the upper class guys, and then they invite you into their parties and social circles and so forth. So you kind of have to have a bit of a strategy, or a bit of purposefulness about doing that. Otherwise, you'll kind of stick in the lower middle class sphere. So it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, man. When you're talking about that sphere, you're talking about girls that have kind of been, they know gringos. They've been dating gringos, and it's just that kind of whole thing where it's, the Latin girl who only dates the gringos, which that's like a whole different thing, right? Versus like the girl who's really in that upper tier, that higher class kind of girl. But yeah, I would say definitely some good insights there. So let's talk a little bit about a few other things. So how do you feel like meeting girls is different in Latin America rather than like in the US?
I think what people tell me a lot is that it feels more normal, or it feels more how it used to be, where in Latin America, there's like less of a tension. There's less of a sort of like battle between the sexes or something like that. And it's just more how it used to be, maybe in like the 50s or 60s, where it's just very normal. And I think, I think it's also easier to run like a simple date in Latin America, where, you can go for ice cream and walk in the park and do these sort of things, where more and more I hear from guys in the States that you really have to splash out on dinner and just like spend a whole lot more money. So I think like in Latin America, it's a lot easier to run a simple date. And then people just overall say that it's just very refreshing how old school it is, and just how kind of just like relaxed and go with the flow it all is.
Yeah, I think girls in Latin America in general are definitely more feminine. Yeah, like there's some of like the feminism that's made its way into Latin America for sure. And I've had some funny conversations with some hardcore feminist Latina girls, but they're more feminine in general for sure than the US, and it is a little bit more older school in that sense. And yeah, like I think in the US, I think you might have said this on Twitter or Jake No Matter or something, but like a lot, it's very alcohol related in the US, where you're going for drinks or you're going out to a restaurant and then you're having like, a bunch of cocktails, whatever. But in Latin America, you can just go get a coffee and go for a walk in the park and then go home with the girl. Right. Like that was like my go-to date when I was living in Colombia, just like a 4 p.m. coffee date. And it was just simple, easy, and chill. And it is something that's, maybe a little bit different than in the US. And then,
right. Like I always see these videos where it's like, this guy tried to take me to Cheesecake Factory. I'm not like, I need like whatever, like the steakhouse or something.
Yeah, man. No, it's wild. I will say though that in Bogota, I would do more dinner dates. Like when I'm in the US, I basically would never do first date dinner dates, because it's number one, it's super expensive. Number two, it's not really super conducive to getting to know the girl. There's a bunch of reasons why it doesn't work in the US, right? You don't want to be spending $200 a night on a first date. But in Bogota, it worked pretty well, because there was a lot of really upper tier, like high class restaurants that would only be like $50 or $60 for two people for like a full meal with drinks and stuff. And they would serve you pretty quick. So you'd be in and out of there in like the same time frame that you'd be having drinks normally. So I was like, all right, I'll go to dinner a little bit more often. And that tended to work out pretty well. So that is, yeah, there are some different strategies as far as like the way you might approach dating in Latin America, especially the first few dates in Latin America versus the US. in general, I would say it's a bit easier.
I think the walkable nature of the cities is
yeah.
also a huge factor. Because I think maybe we assume that everyone listening to this in the U.S. lives in, I don't know, downtown Boston or downtown New York or something. But I'm sure a lot of guys listening to this are like out in the suburbs or something, or in a small car dependent area. And the difference between being in car dependent U.S. and being in walkable Latin America is just night and day, from a lifestyle perspective, and of course from a dating perspective as well. It makes things so much easier. In a lot of ways, I think so much I could say to this. I mean, it makes like dating is really very logistics based. I'm sure you teach this in your programs, that logistics are huge, and making the girl kind of come to your area where you're, a 5-minute walk from your place, and this kind of thing. But like the walkable nature helps in a couple ways. Like one, I'm sure you also teach that you can't just go to a sit down dinner and then and just like sit and talk for a couple hours and then maybe go straight back to your place. Like there needs to be more movement. There needs to be more location changes in a date in order for something like that to happen, right? It needs to be like, okay, like first we go to the ice cream place, and then we sit on the park bench, and then we go to the whatever thing, check out the museum, you know what I mean? And you have different venue changes where you're leading and she's getting used to following you. She's getting used to seeing your head with a bunch of different backgrounds behind it. And there's more dynamism to the date. And this is a lot easier in Latin America just due to the walkable nature of the city. So even if you start at the fancy restaurant, as you said, it's very easy to then walk across the street to get the ice cream, or maybe there's live music in the park and there's free salsa lessons or something, right? Whereas in the US, because it's so car dependent, it becomes a very high stress, but like it becomes a huge decision point where it's like, do I get in this guy's car? Do I get in the Uber with him? Whereas if you're just walking across the street, you're just walking, like it removes that decision layer and that sort of like binary yes, no type of thing, and just makes things flow a lot smoother.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, man. Like the cities are super vibrant because they're so walkable, and it's so cheap or in most places it's decently pretty cheap to live in a good area. And obviously you want to do your research before going to a city, find out where the good nightlife is, the good parks, like the good walkable areas, right? And then go live in that area, and then boom, you have 10, 15, 20 like good potential date spots you can go to that are within a 5-10 minute walk of your house. And you're right next to the nightlife too. So you basically have the logistics fully on point. And it's usually cheap enough too, where, a lot of times the girls are, as you mentioned, they might like live 30, 40 minutes outside that city center, but it might only be like $5 or $6 to send them an Uber and have them come in to where you're at. And so that was like a good strategy for me in Bogota. Just send the girls an Uber to and from the venue. But having it be so vibrant and walkable, even in like the smaller, like more suburban, they call them like the Pueblo Mágicos out here in Mexico, right? Like the smaller cities. Like we were in one of those a few weeks ago, and it was just so vibrant. You remember just walking around. It's like, man, this would never happen in like Cranston, Rhode Island, like where I was from, right? Like you wouldn't have this. So it becomes really, really easy to meet people as far as like just approaching, as far as going on dates, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a 50 or 100,000 person city in Latin America has the vibrancy and the life and the people in the streets and the activity of like a 500,000 or 1 million person city in the US. It's kind of crazy. Another thing you mentioned I'll touch upon is going out, because you talked about alcohol. Going out is very different in Latin America in general, where in a number of different ways. One, it's way less alcohol dependent. And part of that is due to there's just more emphasis on dancing. So guys, definitely learn some salsa, learn to dance a little bit, do some lessons, whatever. And it's very easy to have a good time in Latin America without drinking. Whereas in the US, it's pretty tough to do because you go to the booth or whatever, and the music's loud and you're just bobbing your head. And well, if you're just like bobbing your head and kind of doing nothing, like you kind of have to drink. But in Latin America, it's like much more dynamic. You're often like in a circle as a group, or you're dancing, and it's much easier to get away with not drinking. And I think like people have these connotations about like what going out is in the US, where they go like, oh, I don't want to go out tonight, because they have this idea that going out involves a 2 to 3 hour pregame, and then an expensive cab, and then an expensive cover charge, and then an expensive bar tab. Whereas in Latin America, going out can literally just mean going across the street, getting $1-2 beer, you know, dancing with a couple of girls, and just like kind of seeing what happens. And it's much lower investment overall.
Yeah, man. One thing I would add to that is you have different like tiers of nightlife in Latin America, right? And especially if you're in a bigger city, you're gonna have like the chill bars, clubs where just kind of everyone goes to. Then you're gonna have some of the more upscale places, and depending on the city, you're gonna have to work your way into some of those places, right? Like in Mexico City, there's definitely an element of you gotta try to know somebody or like figure something out, and sometimes that's and there was a little bit similar to that in Bogota in some venues. Like there was one I'm thinking of, I think it was called like Clandestino or something. And the way around that is you really want to just get a spot on lock. So you might DM like one of the promoters, or you find the club page on Instagram, drop them a DM, and then once you actually, if you can get into there once and it helps to bring some girls in, just go, daytime approach some girls, invite them out later that night, and it'll make it easier to get in. Then once you're in there, find their promoter, like the main promoter, get their number, get their WhatsApp, and then that way you can set up reservations for the future, and that makes it way, way easier. And then all of a sudden, like the more you do that, the more places you get on lock in different cities in Latin America. So yeah, I would say that. And I would also say too, in some of these like more upscale venues in Latin America, you could just get incredible access to super attractive girls. You know what I mean? Like I was dating like Netflix actresses and different things like that. And I would just meet at the club in Bogota, you know what I mean? Or meet at the club in Mexico City. Like, so you can kind of like brush shoulders with celebrities, or just like really high status folks in those more upscale venues, but you just got to do a little bit of work to make sure that you're getting them on lock and you're getting in there. But
I'm not sure if you hear that ringing.
No, I don't hear it.
Turn off my... Okay.
You're all good. But yeah, so that's kind of like some nightlife, Latin America. And then, I just want to quickly touch on like a few like opening lines or like Spanish tricks that you can use in Latin America. And Vance, maybe you might have a few additional ones that you'd add in here. But as far as starting, just in general, as far as communication, conversation goes, keeping it fun and playful has worked really well for me and just like a lot of my clients. Just fun, playful, relaxed, chill. And you don't need to have like some crazy high level of Spanish. One thing I've noticed is even having like limited sort of like gringo Spanish, where maybe it's a little bit choppy, sometimes can even be a little bit of an advantage, because like they see it as kind of cute and fun. You can drop some innuendos. You can basically get away with a lot more speaking Spanish as you might get away with in English in the US, right? Because you kind of have the out of like, oh yeah, I'm just like a gringo, like I don't even know what I'm saying. And that that tends to work really, really well, because the girl can really feel like relaxed and just kind of chill in your presence. But as far as like just openers, the easy one I use every time is just like, hola, te vi y te quise conocer. It's basically like, hey, I saw you and I wanted to meet you. And then usually most girls, and depending on the city, but most girls in most countries are going to, going to be open. They're going to open up to that. They're going to ask you where you're from. And then from there, you can drop the soy de Colombia en mi corazón, which is like, I'm from Colombia, or whatever city or country you're in your heart. It sounds super cheesy in America, but, or in English, but it works really well in Latin American countries. It just adds a little flavor. And then yeah, you can just kind of have some fun with it from there. So yeah, that's kind of like my go-to vibe conversation structure to kind of get things going. I was going to say, Vance, do you have any kind of go-tos or what you've seen work?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely wanted to make sure we squeeze this in. You talked about it a bit, but do not use sarcasm in Latin America. And really, you don't have to use that much humor at all. Like the U.S. is so banter based and sarcasm and kind of like bust your balls. Like if you try to bust a girl's balls in Latin America, she's gonna be like, "What the hell is going on?" So, I would say like any humor that you use, it needs to be this very like playful, lighthearted humor.
It's very like it's more on the goofy side than you would do in the US. Yeah.
So more goofy, and do not use any kind of sarcasm because it's very easy to get misconstrued, and it's also just not really how they flirt down there. And yeah, so I would just keep it very light, very goofy. Like one of the things my buddy would do is when he would see like a guy and a girl talking, is he would just come up and he'd just be like, beso, 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 and just, you know, like try to get them to kiss. And then they would kiss, and then he'd be like, trio, trio, trio. He'd be like, threesome, threesome. You know what I mean? So just like keeping it light, you know, being like, teach me how to dance, you know, and like have her start to teach you like some of the basic steps. You know, being interested in the culture a little bit, asking what their favorite foods are. There's really like so many things. I really do have a lot of these little gags if I kind of think about it, and little like mini routines and stuff. But I think more important than any one mini routine, it would be keep it light and goofy. Don't be sarcastic at all. Don't do no negs. I guess, you know, you'll have a lot of like wannabe PUAs listening to this. Do not neg in Latin America. It will not work for you. And do these like little routines that can lead to more physicality. Like teach me how to dance. Am I doing it right? You grab her hand. You start doing like some really insanely basic step back and forth and being like, am I doing it right? Is this dancing? And she's gonna be like, no, this is how you dance, and kind of like get you into it. You know, things like that.
Yeah, well, knowing how to dance at a basic level, like even just a few, like I know like 4 or 5 salsa steps, that's helped a lot. A little bit of bachata definitely helps, can break that out once you take a girl home, and like you can joke, oh, let's do a little bachata, throw on a song, and like most of the girls are going to be pretty down. It's an easy excuse to get physical. Man, like it's very like, but the flirting in general, physical, and then verbally, it's goofy. And yeah, like I actually have had success throwing in some innuendos there from time to time. Like, you entonces te gusta bailar? Like, oh, so you like to dance? Oh, entonces tienes ritmo. Es muy importante por muchas cosas. So it's like, oh, so you have rhythm. That's really important for a lot of things. And again, it sounds cheesy in English, but works really well in Latin America because they kind of get it, right? It's goofy. Like that's the thing. It's kind of goofy and it's kind of cheesy, but it works well.
Yeah. You can do a lot of this type of stuff. I totally agree that you can get a little bit more sexual faster from a verbal perspective, just because you don't really have anything else to say, and they like hearing it more than I think maybe like U.S. girls sometimes, where I don't know, just like you could just say like random shit. Like everyone will have to find something that's, you know, what's the word? You know, that fits with their personality a little bit, but you can definitely do it a little bit. Like they'll be like, what do you like to do? And you'll be like, oh, I like deportes, sports, sexo salvaje. And she'll be like, what? You know, shit like that.
Or like I'd have a lot of times when girls would ask me why I came, like why did I come to Colombia, right? And instead of giving them like some literal answer, I'd be like, oh, me fui aquí para las arepas y me quedé por la gente, right? So like, oh, like I came here for the arepas and stayed here for the people, right? And it's kind of like this ridiculous thing. Like this guy came here for arepas, like, but it would always get a laugh. Like it almost like it's like having a tight 5. Like I have like a tight 5 in Spanish that like I could roll out to girls in any kind of conversation structure and have it work well. And I know when the laugh is coming. And it's something like that's harder to do in English. But in Latin America, the humor is so similar, and it's like you know what they're going to laugh at, and you know what they're going to find funny. So yeah, it's definitely fun communicating with the girls down here.
Mm-hmm.
But cool, man. So that's some good conversation stuff, and yeah, I guess I guess we talked about some safety stuff as well, which is good. Being able to hook up your porteros in different areas, most important in Colombia, but definitely helps in other countries too, to get the porteros, like the door people, get them on your side. That's going to make everything easier for you. They're not going to like talk shit, if you're bringing a girl back or bringing a bunch of girls back, like it's going to make your life easier there. And I guess one more safety tip would just be never leave your drink unattended. Just so always be careful about that. And then, I guess we can kind of wrap this up by just talking a little bit about how do you get down to Latin America, like, and actually be able to stay if you want to. So I know you have a lot of, obviously a lot of knowledge when it comes to like residencies, passports. Do you want to share some of that here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Mexico is one of the biggest no-brainer residencies. So I think every American should definitely try to get that. It's pretty easy to do. I think, at a high level, it's very important to have multiple passports. It's very important to internationalize and diversify. And Latin America is the region that really makes the most sense to do it. If anyone's listening to this and they're kind of new to things, I guarantee if you start looking into internationalization and nomad capitalist type ideas around second passports and becoming a sovereign citizen, you'll quickly realize that Latin America is the best region in terms of low tax countries, easy to get second residency, easy to get second passports, easy to open offshore bank accounts and get into all this fancy stuff, obtain driver's licenses, and all these type of things. And so it ends up being the easiest and best region to do it anyway. And the fact that there's all these other reasons, it's the same time zone, it's a fun culture, Spanish is pretty easy, lower cost of living. It all kind of comes together to make Latin America make the most sense for Americans, Canadians, and English speakers that are looking to leave their home country and go somewhere where they're treated better with a lower cost of living, better dating opportunities, good weather, and so forth.
Yeah, man, there's probably a lot of guys listening to this who, they came here for the dating stuff and they probably never even thought about, like, why would I ever want to know the passport or residency? So can you just kind of like expand on that a little bit? Like why would a guy even want to look into this?
Well, I mean, it's extremely important to have multiple passports. I'm sure everyone's kind of aware that the West is in decline, the U.S. is in decline, and it's just always good to have a plan B in life.
Yeah, I agree, man. Yeah, I agree. It definitely makes sense. And, the world's in more turmoil now than ever, especially in the West. And, the more kind of like optionality you have, the better. The more like locked down you are, like the less freedom you have, and you never know what rules can change or regulations can change. And the idea of being trapped is not fun, right?
Yeah, and I think, probably your audience skews a bit younger. It's probably a bit of everything, but, your 20s is the best time to live abroad. You have pretty low responsibilities. There's really an expectation that you should live abroad at some point to get a more worldly perspective on life. And in Latin America, if you're willing to put in, 2-3 years there in the same country, you could get a second passport out of it. So why do, the equivalent of a semester abroad or go live somewhere random like Thailand for 2 years or something, where if you did it in Latin America, you could actually get a second passport out of it, learn Spanish, become a whole new person. It's really quite life-changing. So I think Latin America has something to offer at every stage of life. I think when you're in your 20s and you're dating, it's obviously the best place to be. When you're in your 30s and 40s and you're starting a family, I think Latin America is still the best place to be because it's a more family-friendly culture, it's less woke, it's very easy to get maids and cleaners and chefs and things like that, which, upgrades your lifestyle. And then I think when you're older, like in your 60s, 70s, is the best place to retire as well, for the weather, the low cost of living, the food, the access to lower cost and high quality healthcare and medical services. So I think Latin America really makes sense at every life stage. But honestly, like when you're single or in your 20s or maybe early 30s, which I'm guessing is the majority of your audience, Latin America is like such a no-brainer. It's almost like you haven't dated until you've dated in Latin America. It's such an eye-opening thing. It's going to make you better at dating in general. It's going to make you more masculine. It's going to teach you a lot about what it means to be a man. It's going to be a life-changing
experience. Bro, I couldn't agree more. And it really is crazy. Like living in Latin America is kind of like a dream. Like there's parts of it that don't even feel like real life. Like you never had to fully grow up. Like you can just walk everywhere, like everything is super cheap for the most parts. Like the girls are great. It just, your friends are right nearby in the same neighborhood. It's a great experience. And a lot of guys probably never thought of moving to Latin America, but man, like I don't know if I'll ever go back to living in the US after this. Like it is kind of crazy. And I never thought, 15 years ago when I was coming up, 17, 18, 19 years old, I never would have thought that I'd be, living in Mexico or Colombia or any of these places. So it is kind of a crazy thing, but definitely been eye-opening for me. And a lot of my clients who've come down to Latin America, they've said the same thing. They're like, man, like this is insane. So there's definitely a lot of value in it. And I know for you, you do a lot of, you help a lot of guys to be able to get residencies. You help with that kind of thing. Can you just kind of get a little bit into that and kind of how you help guys with that?
Yeah, definitely. So we're basically a full-scale immigration firm. We can help people relocate or obtain residency anywhere in Latin America, any of the 17 odd countries. Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama, Paraguay, Brazil, you name it. We can help people get residency there, relocate there. That's what we do. We're definitely the most active on Twitter, where you can find us at My Latin Life. So that would be the best place to start to get the vibe for what we do and start interacting.
Awesome, bro. Awesome. Well, I think that just about wraps it up here. Do you have anything else you'd like to add as far as, just to kind of put a pin on this whole Latin American conversation?
Well, you've been a previous guest on our podcast, the My Latin Life podcast. So you guys could check out Dave's episode on ours. And we have 160 plus episodes. We put out 2 episodes a week. So I guess thank you for letting me plug the podcast right there and what we do on Twitter and so forth, because I think it really is a mega trend in terms of Americans and Canadians moving to Latin America, sort of propulsed by remote work and making money online. So I guess that would be my other message to people is like, make sure you're making money online, because if you're going to an office every day, if you're making money in person, none of this stuff is really going to be possible for you beyond like a 2-week vacation, which isn't the way to do it. The way to do it is really to move down and get a 1-month Airbnb and spend longer periods of time. So make sure you're making money online. That should be your number one goal in life, is to make money online. And then once you have that, it just becomes a no-brainer to go to
the sovereign man lifestyle, right? Where you can do whatever you want and you can make it happen without having the strings attached of having to go back to that job in the U.S. Great takeaway message there, Vance. And I'll link our other podcast up in the show notes. We did a little bit of another deep dive there, and so I'll link that in there. And yeah, I always give My Latin Life. I always give that as a resource to all my clients thinking about moving down there. So definitely check him out on Twitter. He's got great city breakdowns, anything you want to check out there. And Vance, man, it's been great having you on.
Thank you for listening to Dating Decoded. If what you heard today was valuable to you, that was just a taster. If you'd like to find out if you'd be the right fit to work with us and join the top 10% of men when it comes to dating and attract your dream partner, then go to beast-coaching.com and apply for a free consultation where we'll take a look at your situation and create a strategy specifically on how you can start having the dating life that you've always wanted.